And I get to work on this committee that for 10 years has put together Jefferson County Community. You can see all of our posters from all 10 years. And we are noticing we need to have some more red posters and maybe some more blue ones. Anyway, we have had a really good time for this 10th annual community read. And who knew that Bill Sullivan would be so good? Bill Palmer, who is filming in back, said, "You got to read this book. You got to read this book." I said, "Bill, I don't like that kind of book." And he was after me, and finally I read it. Says, "Oh, I like that book." and then I started reading others of his and found Cabin Fever, which really intrigued me because it told so much of the backstory. And then last summer, every 2 years, Bill leads a hike into that cabin. And so I got to go on that hike. He says it's only, what, a mile and a half? Well, it seemed a lot longer to me because there's no roads, there is, and I've got pictures of it in the back as we're fording creeks and so on. The good news was I stayed ahead of the 287-year-olds. On the hike and had quite a good time. So we've had a bunch of activities already, and Bill has just been a draw and charming. The Forest Service has been involved going to the high school. They're going to be involved tomorrow along the trail. Janelle has just been a bonus, Bill's wife. And if you haven't been to the art gallery yet, it will still be open until the end of the month. And this morning, Craig Graham came in and did a Google Earth tour of Bill's 1,300-mile route, which, by the way, there's a map of it above the table with the coffee and so on. And Craig Brown is the librarian at Warm Springs, and he and a Forest Service cartographer spent months putting together this route, getting these maps, putting together this Google Earth. And we really haven't gotten to hear Craig because when he was doing it at the art gallery, he was coming down with pneumonia. And so he's doing much better now, and I'm hoping we can have another time because he's got rave reviews also. Anyway, there's just been things happening all over. So tomorrow is our hike at Crooked River Ranch. We have 50 people going. And Monday we are going out to Camp Sherman. Bill is going to talk to the students, and then he's leading the kids on the hike. Isn't that cool? So there's a lot of thank yous for this happening. Everybody on the committee, would you raise your hand, wave your hand. Thank you, Patricia, Bill, George, and if you saw our handout, you will see on the back there is a very long list of names. I'm going to read the ones that gave us money. But all of the others provided services of some kind, and we are very grateful to all of the partners that we have had. So the first is Adela and Sumner Rodriguez Fund of the Oregon Community Foundation. And you will notice, if you hadn't already, this is the Rodriguez. Thank you. Annex of the Jefferson County Library District. And there are pictures of Adela and Rod over there. And there's a picture of Adela with Armando Galvez, who has designed many of our posters. And it's really kind of funny because we decided the list was so long we were going to alphabetize our list. And we felt like because Adela had set it up so that we will have money, $2,000 a year for some years, as long as we keep this program going, we wanted to put them at the front. Well, fortunately, we changed it to Adela and Rod instead of Rod and Adela, and that put them at the front of the list. We've also Improvement Project, Crooked River Branch Lions, Friends and Neighbors of the Deschutes River Canyon area, the Jefferson County Cultural Coalition, Jefferson County Library District, and the Oregon Reading Association. And we are thankful to all of those sponsors also. I'm grateful to all who have contributed in other ways like quilters. And do we have any more than one quilter in here somewhere? Two quilters. Raise your hands, ladies. Among others that have contributed. I'm not going to spend a lot of time because Bill's too interesting to keep waiting. So Bill was born in Salem, lives in Eugene now, and I love this. He studied linguistics, and I'm hoping that he will explain exactly what linguistics is, because his daughter's a professor of it in Sullivan. He reads in 7 languages. He plays the pipe organ. He undertakes backcountry ski expeditions and was on Mount St. Helens a week or so ago. And he volunteers to support libraries. Isn't that cool? So he's hiked every trail he could find in the state and is known for his hiking guidebooks. So without further ado, Bill Sullivan.
Well, thank you, Ruth Ann. And first I want to say how much Janelle and I have enjoyed our visit to Madras already. I was just blown away by the high school and how everybody got along, and it was this is a cultural melting pot in Madras, and there are a lot of challenges here. I was just really impressed by how well it's working, and that really says a lot for the community spirit here. Now, about myself. I'm best known as the guy who goes hiking for a living. And can you imagine that job? I know, but the really challenging part is I write for a living. And that's really even more impressive, I think, than going hiking for a living. And I wanted to talk to you about that today, because I'm assuming you've probably read some of my books, and I don't need to repeat all of that. I'll read little bits from a few of my favorite passages here today. But I wanted to tell you about my, that's why I call it Confessions of an Oregon Author, because I want to tell you about the journey of how it was for me, how difficult it was to become an author and make a living as a writer. And as Ruth Ann said, my background was, I studied English. I mean, there's actually a use for this. It's true that I always had in my mind a backup job, though, you know. So I studied English and then German literature and linguistics, which is the study of how language works, not like metaphor in your mind and stuff, and not just languages themselves. And then graduated with a degree in English and thought, now I'll go out and become the great American novelist, and wrote my first novel, and lo and behold, nobody published it. Because an unknown author with a first novel, that's actually difficult. And so at that point, time to fall back on the backup job. And you've got that. So I can teach German in high school. Good. Right, and I get a certificate to teach German in high school, and Janelle can teach grade school. And so we apply for jobs to do this, and we get jobs in Sherwood, Oregon, outside of Portland, and go there, and 2 weeks before classes start, the German teacher, who was on maternity leave, had a miscarriage, and she wanted her job back. And they said, well, but you can teach English too, right? I said, well, yeah. Then they said, good. Then we're having you teach 5 sections of freshman English, which is not quite the same as teaching German, which is an elective. Everybody chooses that because they want to do it. And freshman English, they're all forced to do. And they're sort of adolescent. They've got a lot of things on their mind that have nothing to do with Shakespeare. And I actually really liked Shakespeare, and here there was slogging through it. And it was actually a very difficult year. It was very hard. And at the end of that year, I told Janelle I would rather do anything in the world than teach high school English. I admire the people who do this very, very much. But I want to move on, and I just don't see how I can do it, though, because we need the money. Whoops, that's a little too loud. Yeah, a little too loud. We get it in the middle there. But what I'd really like to do is be a freelance writer. And I know that they don't make much money. You know, sell an article, you get $50. And she said, I believe in you. I'm going to support you for 7 years because I can teach grade school, and it's enough for us both to live on. And so for 7 years, be a freelance writer. Follow your dream. And if at the end of 7 years you are not making a living as a writer, then you have to agree to get a job clerking at Kmart. It was a deal with the devil. But I took it. And so I started writing articles. I wrote for the Mother Earth News. And, you know, this is the 1970s, and everybody wants to go back to nature and live off the land, and sort of wannabe hippies everywhere. And my father actually had bought this property in the Coast Range cheap because it had no road. And there was another reason we found out later. But I was thinking, wow, I could write a neat article about building a log cabin for the Mother Earth News if we just use our summer vacation out there. And, you know, Janelle's free in the summer. She's a teacher. So we decided to build a log cabin out in the Coast Range on this property. And as we were building the cabin, we found out the other reason my father got this property cheap, and that is that the previous homesteader had been murdered there, and there was a ghost story, and no one wanted the place. And so as we're building the cabin, we also interview the neighbors and try to guess which one of them did it. You kind of want to know who your murderer is, and it turns out there are only 6 families in that valley, and every one of them had a motive. They all had a grudge against this old guy, which was not all that reassuring, really. And the other problem we had was that we had never built a cabin before. We had never cut down a tree, but we'd read books about it. And so we go out there with my grandfather's 6-foot-long cross-cut saw. We're not going to use any power tools, right? Partly because we're broke. I mean, we really have no money. The whole budget for the cabin is $200 for the first room, and then another $200 when we add on later. So $400. Well, that's all it cost to build the cabin. But so here, I want to read a section where we go out to cut our first tree. Okay? I could tell that Janelle was not entirely at ease as she gathered the hard hats, axes, and ropes from the supply tent. It took her several minutes to extricate the 5-foot-long cross-cut saw. The ungainly blade flopped around menacingly like a wounded shark, bristling razor-sharp 2-inch teeth. Aren't the first logs supposed to be the heaviest? Janelle asked. She bit her lip. Let's cut the bottom logs later. We should practice on some smaller trees first. The trail I had built from the cabin site switched back steeply up a ridge into a dense hemlock forest. Sword ferns and salmonberry bushes rose from a thick bed of moss, like green sea creatures in an underwater grotto, dimly lit by a distant sky. 100 yards above the cabin site, I stopped at what appeared to be a stand of telephone poles. A dog hair thicket, I announced. A what? That's what they call a place where the trees are as thick as the hair on a dog. They're fighting so hard for light, they only have a few needles at the top and hardly any branches below. Good straight wall logs. I hate to kill any of them, Janelle said. A lot of them here will die soon anyway from lack of light. It won't hurt the forest to thin a few. How about this one? The tree I had pointed out was about 10 inches in diameter and rose perhaps 80 feet in the air. Janelle peered up at it. She sighed and nodded. With the axe, I scored a line around the trunk where the cut would go. Then I added an extra line for a V-shaped notch on the downhill side. Why mark 2 cuts? She asked. If we just saw straight through, the tree will settle onto the blade. We'll cut a wedge out first, the way we want the tree to fall. Then, when we cut in from behind, the whole thing is supposed to pivot down on this hinge in the middle. I saw it on TV once. They had a logger who could aim the tree so well that he set up a stake 100 feet away and made the tree drive it into the ground. Janelle is less talkative when she is nervous. The thought of felling this very heavy tree clearly worried her. In silence, we set up the saw, each holding one of the handles at either end. After we had jerked the blade back and forth for a minute with little effect, she bit out the words, "Don't push, pull." Sure enough, when each of us took turns pulling, the blade sailed through the wood like a serrated knife through French bread. Bright curls of sawdust flew from the notch, accompanied by the sweet, rich scent of fresh lumber. In another few minutes, we had sawn out the wedge, a slice of cantaloupe bouncing merrily down the hill, and were already well into the final cut in back. Then a breeze swayed through the forest. Our tree tilted downhill, creaking ominously. We both jumped back, startled. After a breathless moment, the breeze shifted directions. Slowly, incredibly, our tree swayed back until it was leaning at a frightening angle directly over our heads. Directly over our heads, right. We both jumped back. Yes. Right. I ducked behind a trunk, and Janelle looked up at the tree with wide eyes and began crab walking frantically uphill through the moss. But then the breeze passed, and all of the trees straightened up, including ours. For a long time, neither of us was willing to get near enough to finish the cut. By now, our 80-foot tree was attached only by an inch-thick hinge of wood in the middle. If it chose to defy our careful wedge hint and drop on us, it would squash us like bugs, hard hats notwithstanding. "Let's pick a different tree," Janelle suggested. "We can't leave this one here like this." We approached the tree as warily as if it were a grizzly bear on a tether. I dug in my heels to prepare for a sudden 80-foot dash. Every stroke of the saw now made the tortured tree groan, snap, and creak. The trunk swayed woozily like a lamppost in front of a drunken man. The tree gave a small shudder. "Timber!" I cried, jerking the saw free. We raced for cover, our hearts pounding. The tree tilted slightly downhill, enough to show that it had been sawn entirely through, but then it merely nestled against the shoulder of a neighboring tree and stayed there, seemingly satisfied, as if it didn't care that it was no longer attached to the ground. After a long silence, Janelle said, "That's what we get for cutting trees on the back of a hairy dog." I ventured forward, the severed tree a shove, shouted "Timber!" again, and ran for cover. The tree slowly bounced against its neighbor's branches, but did not fall. Before long, I was back at the tree, yanking and kicking at the trunk. When this accomplished nothing, I looped a rope around the trunk as high as I could reach, walked downhill, and tried to pull the tree down. "Bill," Janelle objected, "it could fall right on top of you." Well, this tree didn't seem interested in falling anywhere. "I've got an idea," I said. Using the blunt end of the axe as a maul, I pounded the trunk off its stump. But as soon as the trunk slipped free, it rammed itself 18 inches straight down into the forest duff, planting itself as firmly as if it were a pier pounded in by a pile driver. The tree looked as if it had been growing there all its life. Janelle gently lifted a patch of moss from the forest floor and placed it on the stump to hide the scar we had made. "Let's find another tree." "No," I said. Now I was out for vengeance. "We're going to cut this one down again." Again? "Sure, the cabin will need some short logs on either side of the door. If we cut this one off waist high, it'll come out just about right." The second time we cut the tree down, the job really was easier. Neither of us was alarmed when the severed trunk stuck into the ground as before, refusing to fall downhill. By the third time we cut the tree down, we felt like old hands at this kind of work. And so it took us by surprise when the tree really did tilt loose from its dog hair neighbors. The branches, like a battleship launched into the woods, snap in half as it crashed across a gigantic old stump and thump in two pieces onto the forest floor, splintering an elderberry tree. We looked up at the little hole of daylight that had opened above our heads. Then we looked at the two halves of the broken tree. "I guess I didn't aim it very well," I said. "That stump it hit must have been first logged 70 years ago. Look at the size of it," Janelle marveled. The ancient rotten stump stood 10 feet tall and swelled nearly 10 feet wide at the base. Square notches remained where the early loggers had inserted springboards. Standing on those bouncy, narrow platforms, they had been able to saw through the trunk above the root swell, where it was only 6 feet thick. Suddenly, our struggles with a mere 10-inch diameter tree seemed puny. In fact, our entire forest shrank as we stared at the ancient stump. Once these hills must have been crowned with giants, the pillars of a great green hall in the Skookum's world of myth. So we learned to build a cabin, and then the 7th year was approaching. Remember, I had 7 years to make a living as a freelance writer. I couldn't write this story yet because we hadn't solved the murder mystery, we hadn't raised our family, we hadn't finished the cabin. And I'd sold a few articles, but you get $50 a piece. That's not a living. Then I saw, this is the bottom of the 7th. Time's running out. I saw that the Congress had just passed this Wilderness Act and tripled the number of wilderness areas. I thought, we need to write a guidebook to that. But we have no money and no car. So how am I going to do that? Well, I'll walk through them all at once. Then I'll just have to buy a bus ticket to the westernmost point of Oregon and buy a bunch of ramen and noodles and granola, and then a bus ticket back from the easternmost point of the state. Well, it was a pretty screwy idea because there's no trail at all along that route. So I went to the newspaper in Eugene and presented them with my plan that I would hike across the state, and I said, would you buy 3 articles about this hike that I'm planning to do? And I think it helped that the editor there knew my father. My father was the editor of the Salem paper in Salem, you know. But he had also bought articles from me before, and he said, I tell you what, we'll finance your expedition. Because I'd already told him that it was only going to cost $250. Because that's just the bus tickets and the noodles. And that's pretty much it, you know. So I packaged up 9 food boxes and mailed them ahead to family and friends who'd meet me at mountain passes. And then I spent 2 months in the library before I went doing research about the places I was going to go. And I had 4 journals, one for each mountain range I was going through. And this is the Cascades. And these are notes I took in the library of the history, geology, plants, whatever things I might see along the way, place names. And notice I write 2 lines for every line that's in the journal because I don't want to have to carry a lot of weight. And then on the actual hike, I kept my notes day by day. These are the daily notes that I took on the hike. And the journal is a little bit thinner than it used to be because I tore out some pages to start fires. But then when I got back, I just typed this into the computer and sent it off to actually, by then, the 3 articles had appeared in the Register Guard and had done very well. And then I repackaged into 1 article, which I sold to Oregon Magazine as the cover story. And then it was picked up as the cover story for Sierra Magazine, which is a national magazine with 250,000 circulation. And then my agent in San Francisco said, let's use that leverage to sell it to a publisher, the whole book. And she had an auction in New York to auction off this manuscript. And 25 publishers showed up. 7 of them actually bid on it, and the winning bid was $25,000. This was more money than I had earned in my entire life combined. And it finally reset the clock. And I want to read one section from this, not the Jefferson County section, you probably read that, but rather in the Kelmiopsis. This is near the start of my hike, where I'm going through this fairly remote, extremely remote wilderness, and have agreed to meet up with the state geologist for that area because he knows about gold mining and stuff. And I hiked with him for a half a day on the edge of this incredibly remote wilderness on the Illinois River, which is a tributary of the Rogue River out there. And his name is Len Ramp. Len Ramp and I cross a high swaying footbridge over the turbulent green-pooled Illinois River and make our way across a hot boulder-strewn bar. We better stop in to see Betty before heading up into the wilderness. Who? Betty McCaleb. She and her husband bought a hard-scrabble ranch out here in the 20s. Wound up prospecting for a living. The husband died years ago, but Betty stayed on. An ancient, unpainted plank mining cabin sags against the hillside ahead. When we climb up the hill, I can see the house is surrounded by a well-tended garden, a patch of green amidst a slope of brown rocks. The garden gate is double-latched and double-bolted, not to keep strangers out, Len says, but rather to keep a clever old hound dog in. Len knocks on a sagging wooden screen door. There's a long pause. I look at him questioningly, but he just shakes his head. Minutes pass before a faint voice croaks from within, "I'm coming." Finally, a very old, shrunken woman stares at me through the wavy glass of the porch door. Strands of gray hair descend about her heavily freckled face. Then she sees the geologist, and her face lights up. "Well, Len, come on in." Inside, the house gives me a strong feeling of vertigo. The dining room slopes woozily toward a treadle sewing machine in a corner. The window is cocked at a different angle. The door frames hump or sag to match the rickety doors. Mrs. McCaleb hobbles ahead into the living room, which slants so radically it seems about to launch itself, doilied sofa and all, through a threadbare curtain into the garden. Len smiles at the elderly woman and then surprises me with a fearsome shout. "How are you doing?" When she doesn't flinch, I realize she is hard of hearing. She also appears to be at least 85 and apparently lives alone, so Len's question is well chosen. "Well, now, Len, I'm all right," she says, "but since you're here, maybe you could help me cut my toenail." "Your toenail?" Len yells. Mrs. McCaleb lowers herself into a swivel rocker. The coffee table beside her is littered with clippers, scissors, and pliers. "Well, yes, I dropped a wrench on my big toe, but instead of the toenail falling off, it did this." She takes off her slipper and reveals a yellow horn-like appendage sprouting straight up out of her toe. From the look of it, the toe is undergoing a metamorphosis into a rhinoceros. "It's getting hard to do all the ranch chores when it hurts so." Len swallows hard. "I'm a geologist, Betty," he shouts. "No matter. Just see what you can do. Just don't use that geology hammer of yours on it." He's got one on his belt there, the hammer. So Len and Betty set to work, ignoring me for the moment. First, Len tries scissors, and then clippers, and then wire cutters. When all of these weapons fail to cut the mighty toenail, Len unfolds the saw attachment of a pocket knife. He puts some weight into his sawing until she winces and says, "Ooh, Len, that's hurting." Len sits back, glaring at the thing, obviously reluctant to give up now that he's tackled it. But finally he folds the saw blade away. "Betty, I think you'd better see a foot doctor." She sighs. "Yes, I suppose this will be the year I have to go in." Len looks at her, astonished. "How long has your toe been like this?" "Oh, I dropped the wrench back in 79 or so." It's so hard to make doctor's appointments in Cave Junction, what with the phones gone after the war." "I thought you had a radio hookup out here," Len shouts. "Well, they changed systems and the new one didn't reach anybody from here, so they came and took it out." She sighs again, puts her slipper back on, then she brushes back her white hair and smiles at me. "Well, so you're hiking with Len." So that book was a finalist for the Oregon Book Award and then was chosen one of Oregon's 100 books, the 100 most significant books in the history of the state. And it's so well represented by your quilt. You've got to go down to the Art Adventure Gallery and see this quilt, which is based on this story. And every color that I mentioned in the book is a color in the quilt, starting in the lower left-hand corner and going to the upper right-hand. So there's the Pacific Ocean, the sand of the beach, there's a red dot for the lighthouse, and then there's bear paws, and there's even huckleberries, and the Three Sisters, and it goes all the way to Hell's Canyon. So you need to see this quilt.
And the quilter is here, Sandy.
Yeah, I was just so impressed by that. Well, so the listening for Coyote saved my neck. I didn't have to go to work at Kmart, but it also imprinted me as the hiker guy. Everybody, that was what I became, and so I was okay with that, and started hiking for a living, and started writing. I did write that guidebook to the wilderness areas. That's the Atlas of Oregon Wilderness. And then 100 hikes books for each section of the state. And actually, since then, I've hiked every trail in the state. And I keep updating these books all the time. I update them a little bit every year. And every 7 years, I'll do a whole new edition. And I'm going to walk over here and show you one hike that I want to tell you about because it has a story. And this is a kind of local book for 100 hikes in Central Oregon Cascades. And the hike is this one, which is a lake in the crater of Broken Top. It's one of the most beautiful places in Oregon. It's just a spectacular place, and I hesitated for years to put this in a book because of two reasons. First, it has no official trail. The Forest Service did not build the trail here. It was, and there was no trail at all for years. And now there's sort of there's a user path. But the other reason is personal. When Janelle and I were courting, okay, this is a long time ago. She was 19, I was 21. We decided that we would take a very difficult hike together as a test. And you want to know before you marry someone if they, spend your life with them and they say they're very outdoorsy, but are they as outdoorsy as you think? So we decided we will hike around Broken Top. This is 15 miles, and at that point, 5 miles had no trail at all, right? And so we hike around the Green Lakes and Golden Lake and over Tam MacArthur Rim, and we get to the crater of Broken Top, and here is this stunning, trailless lake, and we look at each other and say, we will never tell anybody about this lake. Okay, well, that's been 40 years. And now they actually have built a trail up there. But in the meantime, we've gone back in the summer many times. It's kind of our romantic secret spot. And I kept wondering, could I go there in the winter? What would it be like in winter? This lake is at 8,000 foot level. But I thought, whoa, would that be cool? And Janelle says, not me. She's not into snow camping. She says it's going to be dark and cold, and she's not into it. So I got some ski guys together, some friends, and we packed all our 4-season tents and thick down bags and avalanche gear and heavy packs and get our skis together, and we set off up Tam MacArthur Rim and get hammered by a blizzard. You're up pretty high on Tam MacArthur Rim, and all the storms of Western Oregon are funneled between South and Middle Sister and just blast at you. And we're stuck in a tent for a day and a half and have to turn back. We give up. That's pretty humiliating. So the next year, we're back with blood in our eye. We're going to make it around Broken Top in winter and see this damn lake when it's frozen. And then a month before that we set out, I was giving a talk kind of like this, a slideshow, at Powell's bookstore in Portland. And after the show, everybody left except this one young guy. And he came up and said, hello, my name is Ed Young. I'm a producer for Oregon Field Guide, the television show on OTV about the outdoors. And he said, we've been watching you, and we've decided we want to send a television camera crew on your next adventure, whatever it is. I said, yeah, but I'm planning to ski around Broken Top. Yeah. And he said, ooh, we are so there. I said, no. You understand. How much gear would you have to bring in order for a camera crew to do a trip like that? And he said, I don't know, about 400 pounds. So I take this card and put it in my pocket, but I say, ain't going to happen. And then the very next night, I was giving a slideshow at the Sun River Library. And the same thing happened. Everybody left except this one young guy. And he came up to me after the show and said, hello, my name is Beano Fowler, and I would like to take you on my next adventure. I said, well, what kind of adventures do you do? He said, I mush sled dogs. A moment and said, well, how much weight can your sled dogs pull? I said, I don't know, about 400 pounds. So I got these guys together. We all met at the Dutchman Flat Snow Park there by Mount Bachelor, and there's the camera crews with all their gear, and there's the dogs all panting and getting in the chases, and then crack with the whip, and off they go, dragging all this gear up to 8,000 foot level, and it's just a whiteout when we get out there. We have to use the GPS to tell where we are, and we camp. In the morning, we realize we've camped on the lake. But it's sunny then, and looks like we have a good shot at getting around the lake. And Ed Yon has set up this heavy, massive, huge camera, and he has a fuzzy boom and all that. He says, this is a really good location for this camera. I tell you what, we'll give you a little handheld camera and wait here while you go around the mountain. And that's what he did. They set up the camera and they snowboarded all day in that area while we trudged around the mountain with this little handheld camera, and then they filmed us coming in. Successful. Anyway, that's been one of the more popular episodes of Oregon Field Guide, and now that the trail is clear enough, and I've gotten an okay from Janelle, I figure I can put it in the book. So that is one of the hikes that I had troubles with, and finally decided to put in the book. So I have some issues about whether to feature a trail. Do you want to give away a secret spot? And if it's really endangered in some way or has an unexcavated archaeological site or endangered species, I hide it at the back of the book. At the back of the book, I have a list of 100 more hikes, and most of these are rejects. They're full of motorcycles, or it's just forest and nothing else. And some of them though are really quite nice, but they're a little bit fragile. And so you might, if you've done the main hikes, you might look at the back of the book. There's a few secrets back there. After doing those hiking guides, they're like printing money. I'm afraid they sell very well. I sell thousands of these every year, and it's enabled Janelle to quit her job and help me going hiking and editing. And she said, I'm going to be in charge of checking up on the bed and breakfast. So we include bed and breakfast now, and she makes sure that we go there and check them out. And so I guess that was a gamble for her that kind of paid off, maybe, to support me with that. But since then, I've also done a couple of books about Oregon history. And I'm a fifth-generation Oregonian, and so I wanted to do some books about Oregon history. This one I talked about at Warm Springs last night, about Oregon's greatest natural disasters, the floods, fires, eruption of Mount St. Helens, Columbus Day windstorm. And at the front of the book, I have this fictional headline of a newspaper in the future about what it might look like the day after a big subduction earthquake and tsunami had been predicting for the Oregon coast. Quake, tsunami, rock northwest, 10,000 missing, seaside swept away. And that actually is probably what the headlines will look like when this hits, because it will rattle Madras pretty good. It'll knock down a few brick buildings and chimneys, but on the coast, it will just devastate the coast, and then the tsunami really will wash away most of the low-lying towns. So anytime in the next 200 years, that could happen. I thought that was a book that needed to be written because people weren't really aware of the severity of that. And we should have been, because there were stumps on the beach. All up and down the Oregon coast in winter, you see the stumps of a drowned forest. And these are only at low tide. I remember as a kid asking my grandfather, how could those trees have grown underwater? And he said, I don't know. No one knows. They're the ghost forest. And someone thought to count the rings of those trees and realized that they all died in the same year, 313 years ago, when we had our last earthquake. And it moved Oregon 30 feet west, dropped the coast 10 feet permanently, and then a tsunami cut off the trees. So that is a great book to take to the beach. And my other one is Hiking Oregon's History. And for this, what I did was I kept notes. When I was hiking around, I kept running into Vision Quest sites and gold mining ghost towns and wagon train routes and ruts and stuff. And I kept all notes of all of those, a special file, and then did a lot of research about them and wrote a book about all these interesting places that you can hike. You can actually drive to all of them, but then I suggest a little hike that you could do there as well. And I wanted to read the introduction to the section on wagon trails, because it sort of introduces the first pioneers to go through this area. There were actually 2 lost wagon trains that went through Central Oregon. And the first wagon trains, though, were following the tracks of a pair of very unlikely explorers, a couple named Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. And I've already talked about Lewis and Clark's trip and a couple of places where you can go see where they were, Beacon Rock and at the coast and such. And so I'll just start this chapter on wagon wheels. After Lewis and Clark's harrowing description of the Rocky Mountains, sane men understood that wagons could not be driven to Oregon. The idea of an Oregon Trail for wagons was widely ridiculed. But there have always been people who have a hard time with the word impossible. Among these dreamers were an upstate New York missionary couple named Marcus and Narcissa Whitman. Alarmed that the rival Methodists had sent Jason Lee to convert the West's heathens in 1834, the combined forces of the Presbyterian and Congregational churches had sent the Whitmans in 1836 to spread the correct gospel in Oregon. The Whitmans and their 4 companions showed up at the Missouri frontier with 2 wagons piled high with furniture, religious books, and trunks of clothing. The mountain men who had agreed to guide the party west told them to leave the wagons behind. The Whitmans refused. After the Whitmans' 14 horses had arduously dragged the caravan across the rivers of the Great Plains to Fort Laramie, the guides again insisted that the wagons be left behind. The Whitmans eyed the Rockies' front range and sold one of the wagons, but they took the other. Through the Rocky Mountain crossing, Marcus Whitman laboriously pried rocks from the route, chopped trees, and gradually discarded most of the wagon's contents. The wagon itself tipped over several times a day. When the missionaries finally got through to the fur trappers' annual rendezvous in western Wyoming, the rugged frontiersmen there shook their heads at the ungainly vehicle. If the Whitmans wanted to go any farther west, they warned, the wagon would definitely have to be left behind. The Whitmans still refused. The Indian path into Idaho was a wagoneer's nightmare. Marcus Whitman chopped the wagon in half and continued with the front wheels as a makeshift cart. Finally, at Fort Boise, with summer gone, the Whitmans abandoned their beloved wheels and continued on horseback to Walla Walla. The Whitmans had failed to open a wagon road to Oregon, but the determination of the seemingly frail missionaries had dumbfounded the mountain men. And so when Joe Meek, the later hero of Champouy's government-forming vote in Oregon, decided to leave the Rocky Mountain fur trapping business in 1840, he bought himself a wagon, hitched up a team of sturdy oxen, and with a Herculean path-breaking effort succeeded in dragging the wagon clear through to the Columbia River, hauling both his gear and his extended Indian family to Oregon. Word spread like wildfire among the restless souls of America. The impossible Oregon Trail was open after all. And then I've also done a couple of books that cover the whole state, and this is sort of what my kids call the wussy hiking guide. And it does have easier hikes, and it's true, but the goal is really just pick the beautiful ones, and it does have all the bed and breakfast, so we did have to do all that research, and all the hot springs, and it was a lot of fun to research. But in the meantime, I've also been writing outdoor columns for the newspapers in Eugene and Salem. I've done this for 20 years. And so I decided to put together a book of those columns, and that's what Oregon Favorites is. It's month by month the best stories, and one of them is September. I had to pick suitable hikes that were at their peak in each month of the year. And it's easy in summer. There's lots of things that are open. But in September, what are you going to do? And so I chose Jefferson Park. And there's a reason for this. This is this Shangri-La of lakes and meadows on the north side of Mount Jefferson, right up against the mountain. The mountain just looms up above you like this, and there's wildflowers and lakes all over. And that's because it had been my father's favorite, and my parents, both of them. They every year would do a last hike of summer, and in September, to go to Jefferson Park when the crowds are gone and the flowers are gone, but there's huckleberries that are ripe, and the leaves of the huckleberry plants turn bright red. It's actually prettier than in summer, and there's often a skiff of snow. And so they hike up the Whitewater Trail to Jefferson Park for a last hike of summer every year in September. And they kept doing that until my mother turned 70 and developed Alzheimer's, and very quickly passed away. And the September after she was gone, my father asked all of the men in the family, my two brothers and myself and my son, if we would do a last hike of September in Mom's memory to go up to Jefferson Park. So we all hiked up to Jefferson Park. And even though Mom wasn't there, we felt that her spirit was watching over us, that huge mountain. And then my father continued to do a last hike of summer for the next 9 years until he was 79 years old. And he said, you know, it's an 11-mile hike in there, and I'm 79. I don't think it's safe for me to do this, so I'm not going to do the last hike of summer to Jefferson Park this September. And he looked at me and said, will you? And I said, no, I'm sick of going there in September. I'd rather go anytime. I'd rather go in the middle of winter. I don't know. And he said, well, good luck with that. So then I had to eat my words, and I said I'd rather go in the middle of winter. And so so I talked to these ski guys that I'd sort of tricked into going around Broken Top, you know, and said, you want to go to Jefferson Park in winter? And they said, well, you're the hiking guide, you planned it. So it turns out there's a reason people don't go there in winter. They don't actually plow the roads anywhere near it. So when you're hit snow up above Detroit, you park the car, and your car can't get any farther because there's drifts on the road. But you can't ski either because there's patches of bare stuff, and you have to carry your skis and all your gear then for about 3 miles before you can finally put the skis on. And then it's 9 miles from there up to Jefferson Park over Park Ridge, which is this 7,000-foot ridge. And we were so exhausted, we put our tent on the side of Park Ridge rather than go all the way down into Jefferson Park. And this is a pretty steep slope where you could never put a tent in summer. It's one of the big advantages of going in winter. You can put the tent anywhere. We've all got our avalanche shovels, and you just dig out a little platform for it there and put the tent. And you've got this front row seat of Jefferson Park and the whole mountain spread out before you. It was a spectacular place to set up the tent. And then the next day, it was surprisingly warm. This was early April, I guess, but this warm wind came in, and we stripped down to t-shirts and skied down all the way around Jefferson Park, just had a blast. And then night started falling. It was late, and we figured we had to climb back up and get to our tents because the temperature's dropping, it's starting to freeze, the shadows are getting long, we really need to get back to this tent. So we go back up the ridge and find the platform is empty. There is no tent. It's now getting dark, it's freezing, we're in t-shirts. We're 12 miles from our car. We really, really need this tent. And we think, okay, could someone have stolen it? Well, what kind of nut would that be? Ski in 12 miles and take the tent. Besides, they left the pegs. We had these special snow stakes, they're not just a peg, they're a scoop, to stick in the snow. And the tent was a hurricane-proof model for winter camping. Nothing could blow that away. And then we thought, well, maybe a helicopter came and lifted it away. But nobody would have heard that. So then we look at the site, and it's not really quite the way we left it. Where the tent was, there are these pegs lying around. It's sort of a mystery, But there's a 6-inch platform where the tent used to be. And then we realized what had happened. It had been so warm that the snowpack had melted 6 inches, had melted out all the stakes. And then the slightest breeze would send that tent rolling down a hill. We found it a quarter mile away down in the trees and got it back up and set up the tent and made it through the night. But it made me think that Dad was right. The best time to go to Jefferson Park is September. So all of these books about hiking have enabled me to have time to write, go back to fiction. Remember, that's what I started with, was this first book was a historical novel about Joaquin Miller, the wildest pioneer I could find in Oregon's history. He became world famous as a cowboy poet, but had trouble here in Oregon because it turns out he really had shot sheriff. And he had 2 wives at once, but then was elected county judge. He was county judge of Grant County in Canyon City for 7 years. And so that's my novel, A Deeper Wild. But I've done several other novels since then. This is a light mystery about a missing Einstein formula, the case of Einstein's violin. My son and daughter have always differentiated themselves. When my daughter was interested in words, my son was interested in numbers. In fact, when I remember the day my daughter came home from first grade and said, "I hate math," and I saw my son's eyes light up. It's sort of like, that's for me. I don't know what it is, but that's me. Whatever, kids do that. You think everybody in the family would be the same, but it's not true. They're really trying to be different. So he's an astrophysicist got his PhD at Caltech and is at the University of Washington now. And he said, I should write a thriller about Einstein's lost formula for quantum gravity. I said, fine. It turns out Einstein, most of his stuff was sold at a garage sale by the Nazis because they said he was Jewish and couldn't have done anything important. One reason they lost the war because they could have developed an atomic bomb if they'd paid attention to Einstein, but they didn't. They thought it was, Jewish nonsense. So a couple of things are missing. And one of them is his violin case. His violin was a Stradivarius. He played that. And that's in the museum. But no one knows what happened to the case. And a lot of his notes are missing, including this formula for quantum gravity. And who knows if it's true or not, and where it is. So I have it turn up in the violin case in an attic in Eugene. I mean, why not? It could be anywhere in the world. And then I have 2 school teachers sell it on eBay, which is a really dumb move because people would kill for this formula. Even if it's not true, it's incredibly valuable. And if it does work, and it really explains gravity, you'd be able to, build an anti-gravity machine or a gravity bomb? What would that be like? Or create black holes? Well, so nobody actually dies in this book, but the planet almost explodes. Then this one is a historical novel set in Norway. I guess I get bored doing the same genre, and it's just kind of fun to go around and do something completely different. And so this one is about the greatest Viking burial ship ever found, which surprised people because, for one thing, it was found in a hill 5 miles from the ocean in southern Norway, but also because it was buried for a woman. The bones on the ship were female. Now, this is the biggest Viking tomb of all time. And when they found the ship, they didn't think women were even allowed on Viking ships. So who's this queen? And my wife's background is Scandinavian. She has relatives all over in Denmark. And Danish and Norwegian are very close. So we learned the language, took 5 trips to Norway, and translated the sagas about this ship to find out the story of this queen. And it turns out she didn't want to be a queen. the Viking king asked to marry her, and she said, "No, you Vikings are a bunch of pirates. I'm not going to marry some barbarian." So he came over and slaughtered her whole family and kidnapped her. You know, the Viking way. At that point she said, "Well, okay, I'll be the queen of the Vikings, but I will also destroy you." And it took her 3 generations, but her grandson defeated the Vikings, sent them to Iceland, unified Norway, and brought peace to the country. And that's why this ship is so important. She was really the one that inspired, through her vengeance, the destruction of the Viking barbarians and the founding of the modern Norwegian state. And that's a story that I thought wasn't widely known. We all know about Hagar the Horrible, these guys wearing horns and going out and slaughtering people. But it turns out no Viking ever wore horns on their helmets. Not one. Those were Goths in Poland. And the women were actually quite powerful. The Viking law said that if a husband were killed, his wife owned all of his property until a son came of age, or if not, forever. This made, there were a lot of men that got killed in battle. And it meant that women controlled a lot of Norway. While the men were out robbing stuff and whatnot, the women were at home trying to stop that kind of warfare and bring peace to the country. And the story that you don't hear about is that they won. They defeated the Vikings and brought peace to the country. So that was a book I thought needed to be told. And then my latest is a thriller about D.B. Cooper. He, of course, is the hijacker who parachuted with $250,000 and has never been found, or his parachute, but some of the money has turned up. That suggests that he survived. Well, who is D.B. Cooper? Well, 2 years ago, a woman in Oklahoma said that it was D.B. Cooper was actually her uncle, Lynn Cooper, who lived in Sisters. And she sold this story to the London Telegraph. And they printed it without calling anybody in Oregon to check. Well, okay, so let's see how credible her story is. She was 8 years old at the time, living with her uncle, Lynn Cooper, in Sisters, Oregon. And her uncle went out on an elk hunting trip for Thanksgiving weekend. Now the hijacking was the day before Thanksgiving, 1971. Anyway, her uncle came back from Thanksgiving weekend with no elk, a confused story, and his clothes in disarray. And this 8-year-old girl jumped to the conclusion that he must have been hijacking an airplane. Well, those of us who've been in Oregon a while know that there are other reasons why you might come back from an elk hunting trip with no elk, your clothes in disarray, and a confused story. It probably has more to do with Jack Daniels than with D.B. Besides, his name actually was Cooper, Lynn Cooper. How clever would you have to be to change your first name when you're going to hijack a plane but still call yourself Cooper? So, besides, it turns out they have actually DNA from D.B. Cooper. He drooled bourbon on his tie. He ordered bourbon on a plane before showing him the bomb, and drooled just a little bit on his tie. It was a clip-on tie that he bought at Penny's. And he took it off before parachuting. You don't want to have a tie when you're parachuting. And left it on the plane's seat. And so it's not perfect DNA, but it's enough to rule out Lynn Cooper. In fact, it has 1,000 people have claimed to either be D.B. Cooper or to know who he is. And it turns out every one of them has been lying except for me. And you can trust me because I'm a novelist, right? So I've been having fun with my fiction, and my next project is a book of short stories. It's called The Oregon Variations. It'll be out a year from now. And is set, I want to kind of have a story set in every county in the state about all kinds of different people. And I don't have time to read the whole of the story that's set in Jefferson County, but I thought I'd read just the opening, 2 paragraphs. And it's called Aria for Tenderfeet, and is actually the first story in a series of 31 in this book that'll come out next year, The Oregon Variation. I don't know if you read short stories, but they're really fun to write at the log cabin because I can really picture whole new places and get to use all of these people that I run into in not all the hike, just the hikes, but also these talks. I meet people all over the state. So this one is set on the John Day River, near Klarna, on the far eastern edge of Jefferson County. Jack limped out to the porch to check the road from Fossil again. If this was God's country, why was it so damn lonely? Like an old backache, the solitude twinged every 6 months or so, usually when his son was coming, and always when he was late. This time, Alan had promised to bring the grandkids in the early afternoon, and already twilight was filling up the John Day River Canyon like syrup. March evenings were a piece of magic in the Oregon desert, when the world balanced between seasons, and Jack was sorry his 2 young grandsons were missing it. A red stripe of sun flared a rimrock banner a mile uphill, where the Dobson Ranch ended and the sky began. Cliff swallows spiraled across that border from red to blue. The river muttered in the sagebrush shadows about distant snowmelt. A single cricket chirped, and the great dark coolness of the night, sweet with the tang of alfalfa and sage, slithered up around the ranch house like a ghost. 5 generations of Dobsons had held this ground since the 1860s, when the Indian lands of eastern Oregon opened to settlement. Ezekiel Dobson, returning empty-handed from the gold fields of John Day, strayed from the Dalles military wagon road at a ford, followed the bank downstream, and fell in love with this river bend. Jack's grandfather defied the Depression here, paying taxes with merino sheep and sawing his own boards to build a house of dreams. Where was the Dobson, Jack wondered, to take up that legacy? So, a little taste of Jefferson County, even in the upcoming Oregon variations next year. Well, I'm going to wrap it up now, but I think the point, the confession of an Oregon author is you have to follow your dream, but you can't do it alone. It's okay to write for love, and you don't have to quit your day job to do this, but if you intend to write for a living, you have to believe in yourself. And even more important, it's important to have someone who believes in you. And in my case, that was Janelle, who stuck it out for 7 years, and I thank her. So that's my talk about confessions.
Thank you so much, Bill. You're going to autograph some books now?
Yeah, I can.
Turn around so people
And we can do questions, sure.
Questions.
Questions.
Oh, questions, I'm
And then
sorry.
we're going to hike tomorrow morning.
Yes, okay, so I'll just let you handle questions.
Okay.
And then when you're done.
What time are we meeting for the hike? And when? You'll tell me when.
Yes, you have to be there at 8:45.
Oh, 8:45. And where?
I'll tell you.
Okay, good. Okay.
Secret spot.
Right, yeah. So, any questions? I told you my life story.
Have you ever been to Avalanche?
Ooh, I almost was this last weekend.
Okay.
We were up at Mount St. Helens, and we're thinking we're going to climb a mountain, but we got up there and it snowed 1.5 feet. And this was on top of sort of snowpack that was icy, and you have 1.5 feet of powder on top of this slick ice. It's like perfect avalanche conditions. And we decided, I don't think so. And we just went around the camp, and I looked over an edge, and phew, off it went.
Wow.
I know, and I could have gone with it, but I didn't.
We were kind of worried about that too, and Janelle told us what we heard.
Well, and somebody was caught in an avalanche up there that weekend because of those conditions. That's Snoqualmie Pass. They lost a guy. They called her a hiker, but she's snowshoeing up there. Yeah. So I haven't actually been home. But you see them around. Mostly you don't see them in the Cascades because the snow's too wet. Especially up Hoodoo and that area, they don't call it snow, they call it mashed potatoes. And down at Willamette Pass, they call it Willamette cement. Because it's just so wet and heavy. And that's a good thing for avalanches because it's just glued together. It's not going anywhere. Where you have a risk is when you have this powder snow, like out in the Rocky Mountains or on this side of the mountains a bit too. Not actually sometimes, but usually it's too wet to have a ledge. Other questions? Oh, come on back.
Your neighbors in Cabin Fever that had the dairy farm.
Yes.
I'm curious because it was a very sympathetic character, Joe. At one point, you don't speak about Joe anymore. What became of Joe?
Joe was these are not their real names.
Right.
I
assume he didn't
remind me, is Joe the one who built the thistle whacker and did all the
yes,
good stuff?
Yes.
Well, you don't really want to know. But he spent several years in the penitentiary in Eastern Oregon and is now banned from going back to Lincoln County. Yeah, it's tough. There's a lot of poverty and abuse in these rural communities out there, and very few of them escape to go on to the bigger world. You didn't want to know that. That's true. Yes.
Much of the story and the humor in Cabin Fever is told in dialogue.
Yeah.
Did you rush into the cabin each night and write down what people had said that day?
I actually did. I have notes that are done with that typewriter. I have a typewriter out there at the log cabin. We didn't actually finish the story about the cabin fever, that we found out who done it, more or less, and did get the book published. But I was keeping notes. It's so important to keep a journal. That's why I kept one on the hike. And then at the log cabin, we don't have a computer or anything, and no telephone, but I have a typewriter. And every day I go out and write down what happened. And I have a stack of paper that thick. And it doesn't have word for word all of those conversations. And I do have to admit that I fictionalized some of the characters and situations a little bit. The people have been changed. Their names are different. And certainly my brother asked me to change his profession and a lot of things. I did everything he asked. And the dairy family, a lot has changed too. There were actually 3 brothers instead of 2, things like that. And when I have a chapter about the mouse babies, as the kids collect baby mice and try and raise them and then let them free. In fact, they did that 3 or 4 times, and mostly the mice babies died. But you don't want to hear about all of those, and you don't want to hear about the ones that failed. You want just one story. So I did combine that into one story and had them live. And even the butcher, this strange Native American guy, he's an amalgam of 3 people. So there are, those things did happen. And most of the dialogue is pretty much true. Sometimes I wrote it down that day, but I did massage it a little bit. They call this, instead of fiction, they call this faction. Right? And every memoir is that way anyway, because it turns out that your memories are not pure. That your memories reinvent themselves every time you think about something. And it changes them. It's sort of like telephone, that old game. Every time you remember something, you remember it slightly differently, and it erases the old memory and replaces it with this new one. So every memoir, that's why 2 people can have stories about a historic event, and they're just completely different. Or family members can remember something completely different. And so I took a few of these.
On your hike across Oregon, and you mailed these food packages, and you kept talking a lot about ramen. Are you vegetarian?
My kids are. Both kids are vegetarian. And so we didn't eat much meat. And that's also because we were so broke at the time that ramen is really cheap. You can get, 5 or 10 packs for $1. And yeah, carbohydrates, it's also very light. It's great backpacking food. You just pour hot water on it. You don't have to actually cook it. You just pour boiling water on it, let it sit for a few minutes. It may be crunchy, but you're hungry, and out it goes. And then those packets of salt, man, that's more salt than you should ever eat. If you're hiking, that's just what you need. this, salt and carbs. And so I did eat a lot of that. However, I could not handle the potato flakes. That was just inedible. And then you make this mush out of potato flakes and you add maybe a soup to it, and I wound up stuffing that down gopher holes. I don't care about the grandma, I don't eat that. But you're right, my diet was not very interesting.
Given your extensive hiking history, what's your opinion of the trail park permit system? I know with the decline in the timber industry, some people see that as a necessary evil or necessary thing to pay for our trail maintenance. But do you think our trails maintained well now as a part of that system?
Well, it would be okay if they used it for trail maintenance, but they don't. They don't.
Well said, yeah.
They don't. And it actually takes almost as much money to enforce that as they get from. They use a lot of money for enforcement to go around, put up the signs, and check that people have the permits. And when they do spend it, they're spending it on parking lot stuff and things that make it easier for the Forest Service, not for the hikers. There's no trail maintenance or bridges or anything done with that money. That's all done by volunteers.
Yeah, it seemed like when I used to hike around Mount Hood in the early 70s, there were bridges across the rivers up in the Timberline Trail, and now there aren't.
Yeah, well, they have had real problems there. And the problem on Mount Hood is that the glaciers are melting. The Elliott Glacier in particular is, instead of being ice, it's kind of like cheese, and big chunks of this slush could break loose in summer and send down these glacial floods that have ripped out the canyon. And it used to be able to just throw a plank across the Elliott Branch from boulder to boulder, and that's good for summer. But now there's this slot that's it's basically sandbanks with rocks embedded in it, and at the bottom is a whitewater river, and it's unsafe to cross. And the Forest Service now has banned you from trying to cross it. They'll give you a $100 ticket if you try, and you can't get around it by going upstream because you hit the glacier, and downstream it's a 20-mile detour, and that's what they're recommending. You get to this creek, go hike all the way out, get a car, drive around 20 miles, and go back and start in order to hike around Mount Hood. The alternative is to build a suspension footbridge across the entire canyon, but this would cost $2 million. And even your trail park permits aren't going to come up with that kind of money, so it's indefinitely closed. It's not just their fault on that. It's the fault of these glacial floods, which in turn are a result of global warming. The glaciers in Oregon have really been reduced drastically in the last 100 years and are melting fast. This is already affecting the water supply here. That there will be less water in the summer from coming off the mountains because the glaciers are much smaller.
I'm
Didn't
not
want to
sure
hear
about your
that.
hike too.
About my what?
Your hike. When I was reading about it, I was thinking, well, how much of that trail really were you bushwhacking? Seemed like a lot of it. You would get to, there were certain places where you were on the trail, but there were lots of places where there was no trail where you thought there was, and then there just wasn't.
I'm going to say about 60% of the trail was on trail. It was actual trail. And certainly the Pacific Crest Trail was like, thank God. Something like, and I think 25% was on logging roads. Or on, certainly getting from Mount Jefferson to the Ochicos, going through Jefferson County. I spent a lot of time on back roads and going through Crooked River Ranch. You know, they're mostly paved. They were gravel then. And then maybe only 10% was actual bushwhacking, where you had to get from one road to another, one trail to another. You didn't want to do that very much. Certainly in Western Oregon, it's horribly difficult with all the brush. Out in Hills Canyon, it wasn't so bad. You could pretty much walk anywhere. But maybe not as much bushwhacking as it sounded like in the book, because that's the stuff you write about. It's the most interesting part.
Did you have any kind of protection or pepper spray or anything in case you ran into something big and scary?
Well, no, I didn't. And I think the most dangerous thing you can do would be to take a weapon into the wilderness. I've never actually met anybody with a weapon. that would be like the marijuana grower. He was armed. He had, an ammo belt and a big .45 revolver and a poison blowgun and all of that stuff. And that was the scariest encounter I had had. Otherwise, the people that actually hike anywhere are pretty nice. The weirdos are left back of the trailhead or in towns, And the people who hike in are always frighten me. I mean, you wouldn't hike in 5 miles to rob somebody. And then you have to carry it out, and everybody can trace you, and they just use a cell phone and say, that guy's car up at the trailhead. No, I don't do that. And in terms of animals, I saw very few, considering that was over 1,000 miles, and since then I've hiked 20,000. I've only seen 2 cougars all that time, and one was they're both very shy and mostly at night, and maybe a dozen bears, all black bears, and all very small, and all running away as fast as they can. No one has ever been killed by a bear or a cougar in the history of Oregon, ever. No one. And I don't think anyone's ever been eaten by a bear in the history of the planet. They're not interested in eating people. I mean, the Far Side and all these cartoons be damned. The bears do not chase you down for you. They chase you down for your food. They want the ham that you've got, and the bacon, and the honey, and tuna fish, and that's what they want. And if you've got nothing but ramen, they're not very interested in you. So, the dangers in the wilds have been way overrated, and it's largely, I think, it's built hardwired into our brains that 100,000 years ago, people really were hunted by animals, and we were afraid. We're bred to be afraid of large predators and snakes, but this is no longer true. People, with our weapons and all, have eliminated all of the big dangerous species that would hunt us. When people have been in North America for about 14,000 years, and within 300 years of their arrival here, all the large megafauna were wiped out, hunted to extinction. The mammoths, the tigers, there were cheetahs in Oregon. These are all hunted to extinction within 300 years. And the ones that survived, the cougars and the bears, learned to be very, very shy, because people mean death. And you don't hunt them, you stay away from them. And this is probably not a very popular opinion, but that's partly because I think of the way we're built. We're built to be afraid of these things. So it isn't always a rational argument about that. So don't be afraid. Yes?
One more fear.
One more fear, okay.
Forest fires.
Well,
Have you ever been caught or?
Yeah, not too bad.
We have a lot
Yeah.
of fires go through here.
Last August, I was giving a talk in Sisters, and someone came up to me and said that this book had helped them escape a fire. They had been backpacking at the Chambers Lakes from Pole Creek, and they left. There were 4 cars that were left at Pole Creek, and about 9 people then camped at Camp Lake up between South and Middle Sister. And they were up there for the weekend, and we're starting to hike back down, and they saw this smoke cloud ahead of them, and thought, well, we'll just keep on going, I don't know what that is. And then they saw a wall of fire in front of them. Thought, yeah, we better, let's call in. And so they call a cell phone in 911, and they say, oh, are you the ones that had the cars at Pole Creek? That trailhead no longer exists, and you can't go that way. And they said, okay, well, we'll hike over to Green Lakes. I said, no, actually, that trail's cut off too. There are no trails out from where you are. So what are we going to do? I said, well, go up high, maybe, where there aren't forests. And they went back to camp, and the 9 of them sat down and thought about what are we going to do. And they decided, they saw in the book that there was a pass between North and Middle Sister, and on the other side was a trail that would take them out the Obsidian Trail to McKenzie Pass. And they decided to hike over this pass with no trail in the saddle between North and Middle Sister, And they told 911 that that was their plan. They said, okay, sounds good. And they calculated the mileage and said, well, we'll be at McKinsey Pass at midnight. And they said, we've got headlights, and the 9 of us are going to go. And they said, good, we'll have a car waiting for you. And they did that. They hiked all the way out to McKinsey Pass, and there was a truck waiting for them, and took them all back. And then, and she showed me then, on her cell phone, the picture of her car. Just a burnt-out shell. And she said that she got a new car from the insurance company, but they would not give her a new copy of the book. That's my closest story to a forest fire. Yeah.
Actually, I climbed the Middle Sister Labor Day weekend, parked at the Bull Creek Trailhead, and I think that happened the next week or something. But which I guess raises the question of, I understand kind of that whole east slope there, Three Sisters burned up in that Bull Creek. Is that going to change the nature of the trails and the campgrounds at all? Or are they all still just there? Are there trees across the trail? What's going to be the status of that? Are you aware at all?
Well, the Bull Creek Trail is closed. You can't go in that area this winter. I wanted to ski in there to see what it looked like, and they wouldn't let me. And I have this feeling that they're going to not maintain the trails for a couple of years, because that's what happened at Sandian Pass. It burned pretty hot in there. It's mostly lodgepole pine, and lodgepole pine is designed to burn every tree and then reseed really well. They're excellent at reseeding after fires. Lodgepole pine forests never get older than 100 years, because if they do, then and they get that old, then they're full of bugs, and that's part of the system too. And the only way to deal with bugs is fire. And lodgepole pine then want fire to come through so they can start again and get rid of the other trees. But at Bull Creek, it means then that you've got these dead telephone poles all over and they're falling. And the Forest Service doesn't want to come in and deal with that for a while. So I would not hike there this summer. I'm going to guess that they're going to spend this summer starting to clean it up, and maybe it's higher use than some of the trails that were been closed at Jefferson. So they're going to open it, but it may take a year or two. Give them a little while. And you don't really want to be there the first year anyway, because it's just puff of dust, puff of dust. The second year after it, then all the bare grass will be blooming, and there'll be plants and flowers coming out. It'll be more fun. Yeah. All right.
So you mentioned snakes, and then
Oh,
you
no,
just
we-
went off the topic.
You won't let me get. Oh, you want to talk about them for Otter Bench?
No, I just want you to talk about fear of
Cougars and bears,
and snakes.
but you want to talk about snakes. Well, snakes can kill you, I suppose. They do. About once every 10 years in Oregon, someone dies of a rattlesnake bite. So it's like 1,000 times less likely than being stung to death by bees. It's probably 20 times less likely than being trampled by cows. But it is still a real thing. When you find out who has been killed by rattlesnakes, who has been killed by rattlesnakes?
Young,
Yes.
intoxicated males.
That's it. That's it exactly. That's right. It is. They are young, intoxicated males. And when they sober up, you ask them how they got there. They said, well, that we heard this rattlesnake, and so we came at it with a stick and we're poking it into a corner. Of course, the one thing that will make a snake bite you is if you would poke it into a corner with a stick. And he said, well, why were you doing that? Well, we were afraid someone would get hurt. Okay. Yeah. So you're unlikely to do that, right? Good. And you're not going to poke a rattlesnake with a stick.
No, but I take my hiking poles.
So you got the stick. No, the rattlesnakes give you this warning, but they don't want to bite you. They need that venom for hunting. And if they use their venom, they don't have it for months, and they get hungry, and they don't want to do that. They will only bite if they are in fear of their lives.
I've got a question about your process of writing. When do you write? You've got journals.
Yeah.
Do you sit down and do it all at once, or do you set a project date with the publisher and then have to produce, or?
Yeah, I do that. Yeah, I'm self-employed, freelance writer, and so there's nothing telling you to get up in the morning. So I do set deadlines for myself. The best writing time for me is the early morning. If I'm writing a novel, for example, and I've got a situation that doesn't work out, you go to bed at night thinking about it, and in the morning, and at night you can have dreams and all kind of weird things. That's garbage. But in the morning, as you're sort of dozing awake, those are the clearest moments. And even without thinking about it, the answer comes out. That's how it has to work. And I do my best writing in the early morning. But in terms of the deadlines, since I don't have otherwise deadlines, I set them for myself. I will, for example, the book of short stories that's coming out next April, it's not done yet. And I'm already booking an author's tour for it. I've done the publicity, I've got the cover, it's all set, but I haven't written it yet. And I find there's nothing more compelling than to have an author's tour lined up and know that you're going to look like a fool if you don't have the book. And I've done that with pretty much all of my books now. Like this 100 Hikes in Northwest Oregon that just came out 3 weeks ago. Well, I was still working on that in March, getting it. In a way, it's good because it's really fresh. It's the latest up-to-date stuff. I was able to get the new permit system for Mount St. Helens and all that stuff in the book. But it really does give you a kick in the pants to get it done. And nowadays, they can publish these books, print the books so fast. There's the printer I use in Salem has a 4-day turnaround time. From the time I give them the files to the time a truck arrives with the books is 4 days. So that enables me to get these hiking guides really, really fresh. I intentionally don't finish them until March and then have them come out in April each year to keep them up to date. It's a little scary with the novels if you haven't finished that and you've got the author's tour looming.
Is the Novelist Press, is that your own? I noticed that this...
Oh, come on. Someone here can tell me what novelist means. Don't you tell. Come on.
What's the word?
Nablus is the name of the press. Nablus Press.
Sullivan backwards.
Yes! That's Sullivan backwards.
I noticed that the address on Onyx Street,
Is mine.
I went to the U of O, yeah, it's the same as your wife's was listed at the art show now.
Yeah, this is where for hiking guidebooks, there's no point in having a New York publisher. I mean, why send this thing off to New York? It'd take years, and then they'd ship it back here. And, no, we can do this. We can do this in Oregon. Stuff like that. All right.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you